The envelope slid across the polished dining table and stopped beside my water glass, slightly crooked, disturbing the perfect alignment of cutlery and crystal. It was thin, made of linen paper, the kind that tried too hard to look important. I stared at it for a moment before lifting my eyes to Patricia, Evan's mother. She was smiling, but not with warmth. It was a practiced smile, sharp around the edges, the kind that suggested she already knew the outcome of this moment. "Go on, Grace," she said gently. "Open it. Think of it as a small contribution toward your future." "My future?" I asked, confused, though something unpleasant had already begun tightening in my chest. I glanced at Evan. He avoided my gaze completely, focused on the expensive fish on his plate as if it required his full intellectual attention. Slowly, I picked up the envelope. It weighed almost nothing. Inside were neat stacks of $100 bills. I counted quickly. 15 of them. I looked up again. "Is this a gift?" Patricia laughed softly, the sound chiming against the crystal glasses. "Goodness, no. We're not that informal. It's more of a guidance allowance, a little fun to help you improve certain things." "Improve what?" I asked. She leaned closer, lowering her voice while ensuring everyone heard every word. "Your presentation, dear. Evan's tenure review is coming up soon, and while your background is admirable, that rustic appearance of yours may not translate well at formal university events. We simply want you refined before you embarrass him." The room went silent. I stared at the money in my hand, waiting for Evan to say something, anything, to laugh it off, to defend me, to explain. Instead, his knife scraped against his plate as he continued cutting his fish. I placed the envelope back on the table, my fingers steady, though my stomach churned. I hadn't worn my dress to offend them. I wore it because in my real life, I didn't dress for approval. I dressed for work. I lived in Wicker Park where people wore what they wanted and measured worth by ideas, not pedigree. That's where I met Evan, at my usual cafe, cluttered with mismatched chairs and the smell of burnt espresso. He had been grading papers with an intensity that suggested he believed himself the most serious thinker in the room. I was wearing a hoodie, typing furiously on my phone, appealing what he thought was a rejected research grant. To Evan, I must have looked overwhelmed, vulnerable, someone in need of guidance. He liked that. For 2 years, he played the role of mentor and provider. He explained history to me as if I were hearing it for the first time. He paid for dinners and spoke with the confidence of a man convinced generosity was the same as love. He never asked details about my work. My biotech research was just lab stuff to him. Interesting, but insignificant. He didn't know my startup had been acquired 18 months earlier. He didn't know the message he saw me typing was part of a multi-million-dollar licensing negotiation. He didn't know my monthly dividends quietly dwarfed his annual income. I never told him, not out of deceit, but self-preservation. I'd learned early that money changes how people see you. It turns conversations into calculations, admiration into entitlement. I had been burned before by men who loved my ambition until it surpassed theirs. So I hid. Messy hair, old sneakers, the appearance of struggle. It was armor, my way of filtering intentions. I wanted someone to love Grace, not the success attached to her name. I thought Evan did, but sitting at that table under his mother's cold scrutiny, I realized the truth. He didn't love me. He loved how he felt beside me. I wasn't his partner, I was proof of his superiority. And to his family I was worse, a problem to be fixed. Patricia waited, expecting gratitude. She saw someone desperate to belong. She had no idea she was looking at a woman who could buy the entire block. The envelope was only the beginning. 5 minutes later, Vanessa arrived. Patricia introduced her with theatrical delight. Evan's former girlfriend, daughter of a diplomat, effortlessly elegant. Silk flowed around her like confidence. Richard, Evan's father, rushed to pull out a chair for her. They seated her beside Evan, across from me. Patricia spent the next 20 minutes dissecting us without using a scalpel. She praised Vanessa's gallery openings and international upbringing, asked me if I'd found parking easily. Then she took Vanessa's hand and held it up admiringly. "Look at these fingers. This is refinement." Her gaze snapped to me. "Grace, dear, your hands look terribly rough. Have you tried treatments? Lemon juice, perhaps?" I looked down at my hands, dry, scarred, marked by work. They weren't decorative, they were capable. Evan said nothing. He smiled at Vanessa instead. Something shifted inside me. Richard joined in next. Evan says you're still at that incubator. Biology always struck me as charming, like baking, but with bacteria. The polite laughter echoed. I studied them carefully then. The worn cuffs on Richard's suit, the bare spaces on the walls where paintings once hung, the panic in Patricia's eyes when the wine bottle emptied. They weren't powerful. They were afraid. Asset-rich, cash-poor, trapped inside an image they could no longer sustain. Their cruelty wasn't confidence, it was desperation. Patricia offered me a receptionist job at a museum, smiling as if she'd solved everything. I set my fork down. I won't be needing that, I said calmly. Her smile faltered. My company was acquired 18 months ago, I continued. My monthly dividend is $85,000. Silence crashed over the table. Richard tried to recover, bragging about a donor for their foundation. I know, I said, that was me. I canceled the transaction, and just like that, their illusion collapsed. I stood, left the envelope behind, and walked out, knowing this dinner was only the beginning of the end. The silence I left behind in that dining room followed me all the way down the long marble hallway. Each step away from the table felt lighter, as if I were shedding weight I'd been carrying for years without realizing it. I didn't look back. I didn't need to. I already knew what I would have seen: shock, embarrassment, and fear hastily masked as dignity. Outside, the night air was sharp and honest. It cleared my head instantly. My phone vibrated before I reached the gate. Evan's name lit up the screen. I ignored it. I wasn't angry anymore. Anger required energy, and they were no longer worth the effort. What I felt instead was clarity, clean, sharp, and irreversible. The next morning, sunlight streamed through the windows of my apartment in Wicker Park. The place was small by choice, filled with mismatched furniture, whiteboards scribbled with equations, and the comforting hum of unfinished ideas. This was where my real life existed. Not chandeliers. Not silverware arranged like museum artifacts. I made coffee and opened my laptop. At exactly 9:02 a.m., I redirected the $2 million I had once allocated to Evan's family foundation. Not back into my account, but into a new endowment at the University of Chicago. I named it quietly, without ceremony, the Dignity Scholarship. Its purpose was simple: fund underprivileged girls entering STEM fields who had talent but no connections, ambition but no polish. Girls who had hands like mine. By noon, my phone wouldn't stop ringing. First Patricia, then Richard, then Evan. I let them all go to voicemail. Evan's messages grew more frantic as the day passed. Grace, please answer. There's been a misunderstanding. My parents didn't mean it like that. We can talk. We can fix this. Fix what? You don't fix a worldview. You don't repair respect after it's been revealed to never exist in the first place. That evening, Evan showed up at my apartment unannounced. He looked smaller standing in my doorway, stripped of the academic authority that insulated him at home. You humiliated my family, he said, skipping any form of greeting. I leaned against the doorframe, calm. They humiliated themselves. You blindsided me, he added. You let me believe you were struggling. No, I corrected gently. You assumed I was? He opened his mouth, then closed it. For the first time, he seemed unsure of which version of me he was speaking to. I loved you, he said finally. I studied his face, the confusion, the wounded pride, the desperation to regain control of the narrative. You loved feeling needed, I said. You loved explaining the world to me because it made you feel taller. That's not fair. It's accurate. He stepped closer. We can start over. Be honest this time. Together. I shook my head. Honesty requires equality. You never wanted that. I don't fit into your life, I continued, and you don't belong in mine. He left without another word. 6 months passed. The estate was sold quietly, without press releases or farewell galas. The family moved into a smaller place far from the neighborhoods where appearances mattered more than solvency. Evan didn't get tenure, not because of me, but because prestige couldn't compensate for mediocrity forever. I heard these things indirectly. I didn't ask. I was busy. My new lab opened on the south side of the city. A renovated warehouse filled with light, purpose, and 45 employees who believed in what we were building. No marble floors, no crystal. Just innovation humming through the walls. The sequencing system my team developed went into clinical trials that winter. We identified genetic markers that had been missed for decades. Parents cried in hospital hallways when they finally got answers. That was impact. That was real. Late nights became routine. I worked in sneakers, hair pulled back, hands rougher than ever. I loved every minute of it. One evening, while reviewing grant proposals, I received an email from a scholarship recipient. She was 17, brilliant, first in her family to attend college. She wrote, "I was told to keep my hands soft if I wanted to be taken seriously. I read your story on the scholarship page. I don't think I'll hide them anymore." I closed my laptop and sat back, letting the words settle. That was worth everything. Sometimes standing by the lab windows, I could see the Chicago skyline glowing in the distance. The city didn't care who your parents were. It rewarded work. It respected results. That was why I stayed. Evan tried calling again once. I didn't answer. Not out of spite, but because some chapters don't deserve sequels. I never stopped wearing my messy bun. Never softened my hands. Never apologized for taking up space. I didn't win that night at the dinner table because of money. I won because I finally chose myself, without permission, without explanation, and without shame. And that choice changed everything. The first snow of winter fell quietly over Chicago, dusting the streets outside my lab in a soft white hush. Inside, the building was alive, keyboards clicking, machines humming, low voices debating data points. This was the sound of progress. This was what fulfillment felt like. I stood near the glass wall of my office watching my team work. 45 people, 45 livelihoods, scientists, engineers, analysts, people who didn't care where you came from or how you dressed, only whether your ideas held up under scrutiny. 6 months ago, I would have been sitting at a polished dining table, shrinking myself to fit someone else's expectations. Now I was exactly where I belong. The Dignity Scholarship launched quietly, without press or publicity. I insisted on that. The girls who applied didn't need a spotlight. They needed opportunity. Applications poured in, stories of brilliance constrained by circumstance, ambition dulled by being told they were too much or not refined enough. Every application felt familiar. I read each one personally. On a cold Tuesday morning, I attended the first scholarship orientation. No speeches, no donors on stage, just a room full of young women with nervous smiles and restless hands. I told them one thing. You don't owe the world softness. You don't owe it gratitude for letting you exist. Take up space, build things, let your work speak. Some of them cried, some nodded fiercely, all of them listened. That night, Evan sent his final message. I still don't understand how everything fell apart so fast. I stared at the screen for a long moment before deleting it. He didn't need to understand. Understanding required self-reflection, and that had never been his strength. What he lost wasn't me. What he lost was the illusion that he was indispensable. Life moved on. The lab expanded. Our clinical trials showed promising results. Investors came calling, serious ones this time, who spoke in projections and timelines, not condescension. I chose partners carefully. Power, I'd learned, was best shared with those who respected it. Occasionally, I thought about that dinner, not with anger, but with curiosity. It fascinated me how clearly people revealed themselves when they thought they held authority. Patricia's smile, Richard's jokes, Evan's silence. They believed worth was inherited, curated, displayed. I believed it was built. One evening, while cleaning my desk, I found the folded business card Patricia had slipped into my purse that night, the number of a personal stylist she insisted would help me blend. I smiled and dropped it into the shredder. Outside, the city lights reflected off the river, steady and unbothered. Chicago didn't pretend to be perfect. It showed its scars openly. That honesty was why I loved it. I walked through the lab floor, stopping to check in with a junior researcher struggling with an algorithm. Her hands were shaking slightly as she explained her concern. "Your model is solid," I told her. "You're just doubting yourself." She exhaled, relief flooding her face. "Thank you," she said. "Sometimes I feel like I don't belong here." I met her eyes. "You do. You earned your place." Those words mattered more than any inheritance ever could. Later that night, alone in my office, I thought about the girl I used to be. The one who hid her success behind worn shoes and quiet smiles. She did what she had to do to survive. But survival was no longer the goal. Ownership was. I still lived in the same apartment, still burned toast, still cried at dog commercials. Wealth hadn't changed those things. What had changed was my refusal to accept anyone else's definition of my value. The world didn't need another polished figurehead. It needed builders. And I was one of them. Some people mistake grace for weakness. They think kindness means compliance. They think humility means submission. They're wrong. Real grace is knowing who you are and refusing to shrink for anyone. On late nights when the lab was quiet and the city breathed outside the windows, I rested my hands on the desk. Scarred, rough, capable. Hands that built machines. Hands that signed futures into existence. Hands that chose dignity over approval. I smiled, not because I had money, but because I had freedom. And this time, I didn't need anyone's permission to keep it.